Rather than British Steel, it's actually Screaming for Vengeance that forges this band's identity. Screaming for Vengeance has been my gym album this week. It's I think it's my favourite Priest album. I would say the best Priest album, but not having actually heard all their, I think they've got like a 19 album discography now. Not having heard all those albums, I couldn't really lay claim to that. Screaming for Vengeance is arguably the greatest album they put out during their early 80s commercial period. It was some fairly shaky ground. I think British Steel, to use that word again, forged the perfect balance between hard, uncompromising rock and sort of more commercial leanings. This album refocuses the band, establishes an equilibrium between the more commercial ambitions, shall we say, and the band they should be. But the results of this album are just most excellent because it's hard, uncompromising metal, but it's accessible metal. I was listening to Metallica's Kill 'Em All recently, and as a great album as it is, it's just, I find it quite a trudge to get through. It's not going to ride the lightning, I think, with the band sort of harvest or harness the more sort of melodic influences, probably due to the brilliant Cliff Burton. But being a fan of melody, I rather like this album. We don't get those awkward, sort of slightly iffy moments I think we do on the previous two records. And I think, and this might be controversial to say this, I think this album hangs together better than the undeniable classic that is British Steel. And it certainly does so musically and thematically. This album sort of breaks away from the past and sees them almost forging a new manifesto. I mean, if I may quote AllMusic, the remaining traces of boogie have been ironed out and the lyrics return to the darkness and menace that gave this band its mystique. And there are gratuitous references to demons, monsters and devils, which is very much in keeping with the heavy metal milieu, shall we say. But the music perfectly supports this. It perfectly supports even those most cliched moments. And when the album does drift perhaps slightly towards a little bit of filler, it's more metallic and is in keeping tonally with the rest of the record. And there's a real maturity in terms of the band's writing on here. They sort of move away from the sort of trite idea of teenage rebellion and start writing songs about S&M. For example, songs like Pain and Pleasure. And of course there's the wonderful Fever on here as well. 1982's Screaming for Vengeance is the album that broke Judas Priest in the United States. After years of heavy metal slog, it may or may not be their best album, but it's certainly sold more copies than any others and is now acclaimed as an iconic album of its genre.
You never stop learning in this profession, you know. I mean, you always hope to improve your ability as a musician, both in the studio and on stage. It's an ongoing process, you know.
And it's a record that yields not just that wonderful single, of course, but also the Helion and the Electric Eye. It's just sheer metal mastery. Not to mention Riding on the Wind is a powerful number that segues beautifully into the pure energy of Bloodstone's tale of dark conspiracy. It's an album that certainly showcased a harder and heavier edge, I think, than British Steel, which has some nice melodic moments. It sees the band returning to kind of straight metal after the melodically styled point of entry.
What we were feeling when we went in to make Screaming for Vengeance was just to maybe refocus the attack, refocus the power and the energy in a more defined way.
And of course the album's most well-known track, as I've said, is You've Got Another Thing Coming, which according to KK Downing, he said, we were quite happy with the album but decided late on that we could add one more song. I know we had some of the parts, but we set about completing Another Thing Coming during the mixing sessions at BJ Studios. It came together quite quickly, and I seem to remember that we all had a good feeling about it, as it did sound like a good driving song and possibly a good radio track. But this quintet were pretty well established as the leaders of British heavy metal, and was certainly attracting some radio play for numbers like the toe tapper, of course, Living After Midnight. Not to mention, of course, Heading Out to the Highway from the British Steel and Point of Entry albums. But You've Got Another Thing Coming vaulted this band into the stratosphere and helped cement their status as metal gods. This was also the time of MTV, who loved a good video. And the single subsequently reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, especially after Beavis and Butthead got hold of it. And to this day still remains the band's biggest hit. But it was Screaming for Vengeance, an album that is now double platinum, has many more gems that tend to be overshadowed by the success of that single. An album that comprises of 9 tracks that often don't get a mention. Interestingly, Rob Halford told Gary Graff, writing for Ultimate Classic Rock, as he reflected on the legacy of this album: "We were very happy with the whole album. It was our 3rd studio album with producer Tom Allom, who really knew how to get the best sound for us. We had been playing a lot, we were fit, fighting shape, but we felt we had good songs, and You've Got Another Thing Coming actually came in at the last minute, and it was huge. But even before that, we felt like we were in really good shape with the album." But I must admit, Screaming for Vengeance has, unlike myself, aged rather well, I think. It still packs a lot of metal punch into its 39 minutes. And of course, let's not forget, these were the heady days of vinyl, when there were strict time limits on bands in terms of sequencing. And in the words of Ultimate Classic Rock, with meaty riffs and ferocious exchanges between guitarist Glenn Tipton and KK Downing, and a solid foundation from bassist Ian Hill and drummer Dave Holland, well, I don't suppose you could go far wrong with this album then, could you? And this album is served not only by its metallic trappings, but also the sort of mid-tempo grooves that they also sort of reference and employ. And we get the band's signature tune on this album, which is You've Got Another Thing Coming, which is a real toe-tapper, which I believe was the band's only American single. We also get Bloodstone, Devil's Child, and the forgotten single Take These Chains, which are all undeniably great, I think. But let's not forget the metallic and electrifying Healing Electric Eye, the terrific album track Riding on the Wind, and the thumping high velocity of the title track, which sees this band sailing pretty close to what we would call thrash metal. This album certainly capitalises on the commercial leanings of British Steel, but I think it's a much better album. It ranks as one of the most important albums in terms of mainstream metal in the 1980s. And if you've been watching a short video of a classic album review, do click like, subscribe, check that notification bell, check the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at the channel. Other than that, hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.